you've made it about jobs, right? It's all about jobs. So let's talk about jobs. I got my very first job when I was actually probably not legally supposed to have a job. And I've always had a job. There was a 9-month window after I came back to WA when I was moving into my portfolio career when I didn't have a job. And it made me feel very uncomfortable. So I know how important jobs are, and so I really liked you talking about purpose and self-confidence and the dignity that a job gives you. So I'd love to hear about what was your first job and how did that shape your thoughts about work and the sort of policies that you've now talked about today?
Well, my first job was as a paperboy in the city, and I did various jobs when I was at school. I worked my way through school. I worked at McDonald's, not the one at Engadine, the one at Broadway. I worked at Grace Brothers Broadway and packing shelves and doing things like that. I did. The worst job I had, I think, was when I was at uni, you'd go to a notice board and just do whatever labouring jobs you could get. And it was literally hosing with these high-powered hoses, pigeon droppings off one of the wharves down near Walsh Bay, where the theatres are now. There was a major company, at the risk of legal action, I won't name them, who were having a party there, and they obviously just contractors were brought in. Like, the occupational health and safety was just diabolical. They gave us nothing at all, and it just all rained down on us. Literally, 100 years of pigeon waste. And, for $50 cash in hand a day, you did what you had to do. But I worked at Pancakes on the Rocks. I used to do the Saturday night shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m, which is why I understand penalty rates are important, because giving up a Saturday night was worth my while to do it. My first job post school, sort of full-time job, was at the Commonwealth Bank. And I worked at the Commonwealth Bank, and they were very good to me in terms of, there was a woman who was the bank manager. She wasn't the manager, but she ran it, the staff. And she'd let me duck off and go to lectures. It was at Sydney Uni. I worked at the Sydney Uni branch. I just got allocated there per chance. And I did that for a while until I realised that between the part-time jobs, I could earn more money doing the Saturday night shift and things. But bank, my job was this sounds today, a lot of the speeches about technology, the changing nature of work. My job there is indicative of how fast the world changes, because my job was to, they give it to the young kid, and I started the Monday after my last HSC exam. And it was to convince people that there was this new thing called a key card, and you could put it in a hole in the wall and money had come out. And it was to convince people basically to get off passbooks. And the success rate, they gave me, my KPI was if I could get 10% of people to do it, to change to this new technology and get people. It was a big deal because you read what was there and all of that. It just says a lot about, given today we can just get our device and transfer money around. I'm not that old. I'm old enough, but and sometimes I feel old, but just the change in technology and the way that work happens. We still used to, in the bank, my other job at the end of the day was to literally, with a little sort of basically a little teledex thing, just add everything up and make sure that it all added up.
Yeah, you had to balanced the branch.
Things were there, absolutely, and no one could go
No, until you balanced.
until it was done.
And everyone did balance, all the
Yep.
tellers balanced. Yeah, so we're two old bank Johnnies, really, aren't we? Yeah.
Where did you work? Which
I was at Westpac.
Westpac?
Yeah. But a bit later on in my career, and I had a bunch of branches up in Queensland, and that was very interesting. The other thing that's common between the two of us is we obviously both studied and worked at the same time. I did both of my degrees by part-time at UWA and then at Sydney. So I was really interested to hear you talk about Jobs and Skills Australia, because I've always felt it's my responsibility to retrain myself, to upskill myself. And you talked a lot about the role that Jobs and Skill Australia will take, but what about the employers, the workers themselves and the unions? How are they going to interact with Jobs and Skill Australia? I want to hear a bit more about it.
I think if you had a peak organisation that had weight to it, that had buy-in from state and territory governments, that had specific purposes, including human services that we've identified in terms of if a function, NDIS, health services, aged care, childcare, things that were by and large had large government funding, then you get buy-in. And you get buy-in through unions participating in it. You get buy-in because there'd be somewhere when we were doing work for this speech, over many weeks. The truth is there's not one place you can go. Whereas Infrastructure Australia, the way that it roll, and I've deliberately modelled it on that, the IRA model, if it works properly, should be that there's one place where you can go that looks at BCRs of every project, that looks at essentially the controlling demand supply. What Jobs and Skills Australia should do is identify where there are skills shortages now, and there's various bodies do that, but what the jobs of the future will be. And by being able to work with industry on what the projections are, what sort of work will be required, then you can, I think, overcome some of the issues which are out there, which frustrate people, because for young people wondering what they'll do. My son did his HSC last year, and a common theme of parents around the country is we don't know what our sons and daughters will be doing in 10, 15 years' time. And that contrast, when I went to work for the Commonwealth Bank, if you had have asked me where will I be in 10 years' time, it'll be at the Commonwealth Bank. It was something that you did. And I consciously chose the public sector bank, as well, because it was more secure in terms of a perception of where I was in my life. Whereas now so many people this is the first generation, I think, of parents for a while who aren't confident that their kids will be better off than they are.
Yeah. And that's the thing that drives consumer confidence. I really think it is. I'm interested in this central role for Jobs and Skills Australia. When I was on the NBNCO board, where Stephen Conroy was the minister at the time, and
me.
Yes, you were there, and also Penny Wong over there. Thank you.
I was better than Conroy.
Minister. I can't make comparisons. I'd sort of disappeared at that point in time. It is a competition, though, I see. And it was very difficult to access the skills that were needed.
Absolutely.
So I think having
Whereas you could have seen that happening.
Yeah, you could.
I mean, you could see it wasn't like it was a surprise.
No, it wasn't a surprise. And there was $42 billion to spend.
And issues like you could have foresaw as well that any major infrastructure project is going to come across asbestos in pits and all that.
But we've got this thing called the Federation, which has its moments. And I think that was one of the things that made the workforce planning quite difficult in NBNCO. So how does Jobs and Skills Australia work with the Federation?
Well, what we did in Infrastructure Australia, and it's been changed the model under the current government, and I think it's a mistake. We had state and territory buy-in. So the board of Infrastructure Australia, a board of 12, had 3 state and territory reps, one of whom was from WA. One from WA, there was one from South Australia, and the other one was from Victoria, I think. But they chose within them, so through the COAG process, they chose representatives, and that gave them all buy-in, because if WA wanted to keep their job on there, they had to, they sort of buddied up, essentially, in terms of making sure that you had that direct input. The truth is that most things in terms of our federation, if you were designing it again, you'd design it differently. But, every road, every railway line, every community service, the employment, the Commonwealth doesn't run any schools. It's all state. Commonwealth doesn't run any TAFEs. So you need to develop models that are collaborative. What the Commonwealth has as its power is money. It's the taxation system. And that's how it can use that to leverage change and buy-in by the states and territories, as well as you'll find as well, the pressure from the private sector for it to be a success, to have that buy-in would kick in. Because it's a source of great frustration for the private sector as well. By definition, new emerging industries, you can't expect them to have trained their workforces as their fledgling industries because they don't have the capital to do that. The capital's coming later. The capital's being invested in physical infrastructure and in establishment. But by identifying where workforce planning needs to go in the future and matching up the jobs and skills, you can do that. I'm somewhat, there's a bit of rhetoric around at the moment about, we need to show that an apprenticeship is just as good as a university and we need to sell that out there. I think that's a nonsense. I met people yesterday at Mineral Resources. They're not into comparisons. They know in and of itself, these are well-paid jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
These are good jobs. They're secure jobs. People want to do it. And the young blokes, and they were all blokes, I think, we'll fix that.
Yes, we can fix that.
I met yesterday were all, they were really excited about what they're doing.
Yeah, my dad was apprenticed as a boilermaker, and I think it's a perfectly great pathway. And I do think that kids will work it out, parents work it out. They don't need to be told that.
But they need the opportunity.
They do need the opportunity, and I do think the vet sector needs a bit more work, and that's one of the things that CEDA's focused on a lot. One of the other things, I think we're in a heated agreement about skill shortages and the timing differences, but where I think we might have a difference of opinion and where CEDA has done a lot of work is around temporary skilled migration, because I do see a role for temporary skills import, as long as it doesn't become replacement, particularly in entry-level jobs. Do you think as Jobs and Skills Australia gets the workforce planning more on track, it might help break through the difference we might have about this temporary skills migration?
I'm not sure that we have a difference about temporary skilled migration. It has played a role. It will always play a role. The problem is permanent jobs that are filled by temporary skilled migration, because you don't have the right planning there. And when you look at the numbers which are there, do we really need temporary skilled migration to be drivers, to do jobs that are available and that we should be training people for? I think jobs such as, we're big supporters of, a good example is the seasonal workforce in terms of people from the Pacific coming in, picking fruit, all of that, that's fantastic. But we shouldn't have to, and there's a role to employ a chef to come in with particular skills, for example, but the truth is that that shouldn't be an excuse for not training Australians, and it is one of the things that is having an impact on wages. If you replaced a whole lot of the temporary workforce who are here on visas with Australians, you would immediately have an impact on wages, which the Reserve Bank, etc., say is one of the things that's holding back our economy. So I just have a view that we should unashamedly be trying to train Australians for jobs when they're available first.
Yeah, and we certainly have no difference of opinion there. I just think we're sitting in Perth, we're a very globally connected city,
Sure.
particularly in oil and gas. And the West Australian companies that are global really do need the ability to bring that workforce through. So I think we can do that.
And we get that. And one of the benefits is that, temporary skilled migration can, migrants can come here with the skills they have and train and, impart some of those skills
that's a really
on
important
people
part
they
of it.
work with.
Now, I think I should give an opportunity for questions, and I think I have one right over here. Usual protocol, if we don't mind, name, affiliation and a bit of context will be great.
Hi, Rebecca Tompkinson, RFDS WA. The RFDS is also a federation, and I'm interested in picking up on your comments that if you were designing the federation, you'd do it differently, what that might look like, and more importantly, how can that deliver for the WA economy?
Well, I think if you were designing it again, you'd have 2 tiers of government, but it rather than 3. But it is what it is. There's no point going too far down that track. Here in WA, one of the things I find about WA, and I'm so pleased that so many of the colleagues are here, you do have to come here. You have to come here and talk and engage and develop relationships with people, because it is perfectly legitimate. This city is the most isolated city in the world from another major city, of course. And WA, of course, isn't just Perth either, and that's why people are spreading out over the next couple of days and going to Karratha and Kalgoorlie, etc., this afternoon. So I think that the opportunity that we have here in WA, though, is always, I think, pretty exciting. This is the key. Expect to see a lot more of us. This is visit number 9 this year, so one more to go, at least.
Yeah, well, we'll be very happy to see you back again. I think we've got a question over this side of the room.
Yeah, hi Anthony, Kevin Stevenson, Chevron. Thanks for sharing your vision for Australia's jobs future. And you talked a bit about job creation through manufacture, which of course takes an incredible amount of energy. So what do you see as the government's role in providing reliable, affordable, ever cleaner energy for Australians?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is to have an energy policy would be bad. It's almost reached a point whereby any policy is better than no policy. So that during the last term, for example, with the NEG, it wasn't what we would have designed, but we would have voted for it. And I think if Malcolm Turnbull had his time again, there were at least 140 votes in the House of Representatives for the NEG. And you would have had, if you had Craig Kelly and Tony Abbott and Adam Bandt sitting together, voting against certainty, then that wouldn't have been a bad thing, in my view, and the world could have moved on. And maybe the political world would have been different as well. But you need investment certainty, and the government needs to provide that. We're going through a transition to a clean energy economy. That's a global thing that is happening. That doesn't mean that it happens overnight. It doesn't mean that a lot of the focus is always on numbers and things. The truth is what it really needs is just a driver and investment certainty over a long period of time. But at the moment, you don't have that. And it's almost like some of the changes in the energy mix are happening in spite of the government, not because of it. But that's creating a distortion in the market as well, in terms of the forms and the nature of that. And it's creating a great deal of pressure and uncertainty, not the least of which is about price. We have higher prices as a result of a failure of government policy since 2014.
Do we have another question from the floor?
Gee, they're polite, this
They are
CEDA
very
audience.
polite, but they're all stunned into sort of speechlessness because they're thinking, there's Diane Smith-Gander sitting up there for, you know, a good 20 minutes or so, and she hasn't asked the gender equity question yet. So I guess the moment has come.
Well, unless you do that, my colleagues will start to ask me difficult questions to try and get commitments for the next term. Will be the next step.
Yeah, and I do have a question I'm going to ask you a bit later about whether our Premier's put in any asks yet. But you talked about right to employment, right to economic security for women, and I do think that that's very well said. But there is still, as you pointed out, a pretty big gender pay gap, and there is gender segregation across industries. So it's pretty clear you get the problem. What are some of the answers that you've got for us?
Well, the first way that you get a solution is by acknowledging the problem.
Absolutely.
That's the first thing. So how do we put in place, in some ways that will mean positive discrimination. So for example, Labor's targets in terms of Parliament haven't really been enforced in terms of, like, there aren't many blokes who've been told you can't run. By having the framework, what it's done is change the mindset so that in New South Wales, the way that it's worked is a vote for a woman's worth 1.2 versus a vote for a man in a contested pre-selection. So guess what? People, if there's a bit of close balance, think, oh, if in doubt, and it's resulted in a lot stronger caucus and a lot stronger shadow cabinet. And the truth is also by demonstrating that, whether it be in corporate Australia, yourself, when I went to Woodside yesterday, when you go around, you know, role models are really important, structures are important, and processes, if need be, are important. You know, the other side have gone backwards, and you know, Julie Bishop's a big loss for the coalition, not the least of which is from WA here. Our team are so much stronger, as would any business be, if you harness 100% of the population, not 50. It's a bit of common sense, really. And in terms of professions as well, so many professions now, in terms of, there's a really good group of people come from the AMW and from the unions each year to Canberra of female apprentices, and it just is changing that whole perception of what's possible.
So would you be up for putting into Jobs and Skills Australia's mandate some targets, or maybe even, you know, call them quotas around places in apprenticeships, places in educational institutions and so forth?
I think in terms of, I'd be reluctant to do sort of quotas in terms of, you know, designated from the top, because you need to get buy-in in terms of participation. But targets should be pretty, the target's pretty obvious.
What's the difference between a target and a quota?
A quota is mandated.
Yeah.
A target is an objective, an aspiration.
So a sort of if not, why not sort of a targety thing you could get yourself to?
And what we should be aiming for is representation, you know, across the board, which reflects society. You know, not just in terms of gender, but across other issues as well. The Labor Party caucus that I sit in today if you compare it with 1996, when I was elected, the first woman elected to the House of Representatives from New South Wales, from any political party for any seat, the biggest state, was Jeanette McHugh, my predecessor, in 1983. We went 83 years without a single woman being elected in any seat from New South Wales.
It beggars belief, doesn't it?
It's extraordinary. And now you look at the show, and not just that, but you look at, Linda Burney, Pat Dodson and Malandiri McCarthy sitting in the caucus.
Yep.
You look at Ed Husick, the first Muslim to be elected to the House of Representatives. You look at a woman who's here, Anne is here somewhere.
There she is.
Amazing, represents diversity. That's what we need to do across the board. And if you do that, it's not a matter of political correctness or identity politics or anything else. The idea, frankly, that someone would be an out gay man or lesbian in the parliament was pretty ambitious, let alone people in the Liberal Party. And it's a good thing that it is now more reflective of society. But I think there's been a bit of commentary, self-interested commentary, I think, about the diversity of Labor's ranks. Have a look at us. It's pretty good, and certainly very good compared with where we were a very short period of time ago.
I think this is a very important point that you make. When you identify a problem and you say, I want things to be different, and you put a bit of structure behind it, things change really fast.
Absolutely.
It is possible to change very quickly. And I think we have a question down from this table.
Peter Kennedy from Business News, Mr Albanese. I'd like to ask you about coal, which was a contentious issue for your party last May. You indicated in your talk that metallurgical coal was okay, and you made the mention in the manufacture of wind turbines. But what about thermal coal? What about steaming coal? Where does that stand in the future of coal as far as you're concerned and your party?
Well, a lot of that will be determined essentially by international markets. The job of government is to provide a framework that transitions through to a clean energy economy, and the indications are, if you look at global trends, that what's happening is a shift away from fossil fuels. That is happening. The debate on coal, however, is distorted by, I noticed there's some statements on social media this morning from people who, if you went to a whole range of people, including people who think they're experts on climate change or what have you, and speak to them about, is a majority of metallurgical coal, is a majority of coal exported from Queensland, metallurgical coal, they'd say, what are you talking about? And they'd say, well, if you are in hospital, the X-ray machine doesn't exist, the scalpel that the surgeon uses doesn't exist without that resource. We can't be in a circumstance whereby all mining is the same and is somehow bad. But for some of the debate that has gone on in a really unsophisticated way, it worries me that that's where we're at, that it's just mining is bad. Mining is something that has produced our advanced economies, have come through mineral resources. So metallurgical coal will continue to play a role. The demand for thermal coal on international markets will be determined by what settings are put in. Most of, if you look at what's happening in Australia, for example, will there be a new thermal coal power plant built in Australia? No, I don't think there will. And that's not a decision of government, that's a decision of the market. is making that decision. So by and large, I think we need to look at these issues as they are rather than in a really practical and sophisticated way. Too much of debate in Australia, including during the last election campaign, is people shouting at each other rather than actually having reasoned debate about a way forward. I think climate change is real. I think we need to act on climate change. That means a transition to a clean energy economy with everything that contemplates. But it also means that we have a responsibility to be a part of the international debate. And at the moment, frankly, we're not. When you have a speech given to the United Nations saying our emissions are going down, when everyone knows they're going up, then it's just embarrassing where Australia finds ourselves. And how can we talk to other less developed nations without getting into that debate with any credibility when our emissions are going up and are due? All the government's own advice is that our emissions will continue to go up each and every year to 2030.
Thank you. As an AGL director, I'm not going anywhere near that. We've got a question down the back here.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mr Albanese. My name's Chris Outen. I'm the Director at Kwinana Industries Council. Thanks for visiting the beloved industrial area this week. You mentioned before about Perth, Western Australia being a long way from anywhere else, and I'd like to look back to the previous election campaign and the result here in WA wasn't the result you were looking for. What would you do differently, or what are you thinking about what you'll bring to the next election, pre-election process, given that things are a bit different here in WA compared to most other parts of Australia? Maybe we're reasonably close to Queensland, or not. But how do you tailor a campaign to the characteristics of this place?
The first thing I'd say is I'm looking forward, not back. There'll be a review and that'll take place, but I'm very much focused on the next election and doing better. And the truth is we do have to do better. And in order to be in a position to form government, we have to win seats here in WA. And so clearly, no point complaining about, an umpire's call and whether, a 50-metre penalty should have been given or not after the siren sounds. The results there, scoreboard shows we didn't do well enough. And we need to do better. I think in part coming here, talking in plain language about what my views are, I have a very clear idea about the direction I want to take the country in. I think the government's complacent. I think the government at the end of this term will have been there for 9 years. And by the end of it, they'll say, what was the point of this government? Boats, yep, they got a debate there. But where's the plan for the economy? Where's the plan for social inclusion? Where's the plan for the environment? Where's the plan for young people's future? Where's the plan for aged care and how we deal with the ageing of the population? Where's the plan for regional economic development? You can have a victory lap, which the government's had since May, for only so long. I just don't see a positive vision from the government at the moment going forward for WA or anywhere else. I intend to come here regularly to talk about jobs, to talk about regional economic development, to talk about the nature of our cities and how we deal with urban congestion. Wherever I go in the country, if I go to Port Hedland, I can talk about the Great Northern Highway and what we did Here in Perth, I can go to Perth CityLink, the first ever federal public transport investment here in Perth. When I get off the airport, I'll go on Gateway WA, largest ever road project here in WA, done by us. I can go down to Esperance and look at what we did separating the railway line and the road project. I can go to Kalgoorlie. Wherever I go, there are things that I had a role in as minister, so I can point towards the way that I work as well, collaboratively. I have had relationships with companies in this room, Perth Airport, Woodside, a bunch of companies in this room for a very long period of time. You'll know what you get. You mightn't always agree with what I say, but you know it'll be straight about answers as well. And I intend pursuing that. And importantly, my team is so much better than the other team. Person for person, in terms of across my front bench, is more representative, is experienced. We will present at the next election. If we are incoming, it will be the most experienced incoming Labor government in Australian political history. So experience of people who've served in government and been effective in government, who have a record they can point to, plus newer members who've come through. The talent that we have coming through is, I think, a big plus for us. The backbenchers who've come in, and largely in WA, the truth is that we had a big turnover. They're just coming in. I think they're an outstanding team as well, and I want to add to it at the next election.
We have time for one last question, and I think it looks like I'm going to be the one to pose it. When I was a consultant, my favourite question right at the end of the interview, and I'd put my pen away and put my notepaper away.
Lull them into a false sense of complacency.
That exactly. And
yeah.
I would say, we've had a great conversation. I've learnt a great deal. Thank you for being so open. I really want to make sure, though, that if there was something on your mind you wanted to tell me that I didn't ask you about, what should I have asked you that I didn't? Now, the amazing thing about that question, as the journalists in the room will know, is sometimes they actually then plop out the thing they most didn't want you to ask. And you get
so
the
you shouldn't have told me that.
Yeah, because look, I
You've
know...
blown it now.
No, I know you're way, way too skilled an operator to fall for that one, and you've seen it many times before. So I'm going to ask it in a different way. You told us about all of the legacy of Labor Prime Ministers. Fantastic things, absolutely no argument about the legacy they left. So imagine you were to lead a Labor government, you were to be our Prime Minister. After that first term, what would you think your strapline would be? What would that legacy look like? What are those words?
That we're headed towards a second and third and fourth term.
That doesn't count. That doesn't count.
And let me explain.
Thank you.
The weakness in the Rudd and Gillard governments is that, which is what I was a part of, and I'm proud to have been a part of it. I think history will record the Rudd and Gillard governments extremely well. You look at what we did, paid parental leave, NDIS, seeing Australia through the global financial crisis, creation of Infrastructure Australia, what we did in housing affordability, across the board, a quite extraordinary record. Last week in Parliament, we had the 1-year anniversary of the apology to the victims of institutional abuse. That was a courageous decision. That was not an easy decision, and the truth is we got criticised for it. Julia, give her credit for the guts that it took to make that call. That made a difference to people's lives. So it's a good record. The economy, people are in jobs because of that. response that we had. And I do laugh at the government speaking about the government. When they were in government last time, they said there was a crisis. There was a global financial crisis, the worst since the 1930s. But because of some of our own fault, bit of self-indulgence, we didn't last, and that was our fault. We accept responsibility for outcomes. And to be in government over a long term is how you entrench reforms. Medicare, superannuation are in place because they were entrenched. So I think Labor in government, the Whitlam government, the same thing, Medibank introduced, abolished, Medicare introduced by Hawke, stayed. Why? Because Hawke won 4 elections and then Keating won 1. So I want to be a part of a long-term Labor government that changes the country for the better. Because I firmly believe that Labor's views are Australian values, are consistent with it. The way we talk to each other about fair go is a Labor ethos. I think a modern Labor government that understands that we need to work with business, that we need an economy that works for people, not the other way around, it is, I think, something that I want to see. I look at the team who are there and I want to see, after I've retired, ring up Patrick Gorman, who's a minister in, the Louise Pratt government, and say, mate, you buggered that up. This is what you should be doing from the porch. We need that. I think that's the lesson that I take from my experience of government. I think it's a tragedy that we blew the opportunity that we had. We've learnt those lessons. There will be unity. People who want to go off on frolics will be sidelined by their colleagues, as they should be, because our task is more important than any individual and who's in any what spot. And I think whatever our failings over the last 6 years, lack of unity isn't one of them. We have been united. People all pitched in and we all did our best to make Bill Shorten the Prime Minister of Australia. We didn't get there, but we will get there next time in terms of winning and electing a Labor government. And one of the things that I want to make sure is that, and one of the reasons why I've set up structures as well and why I've said I want to be Labor leader, not opposition leader, why I've tried to be constructive and cop some flack for it, is that you act in government how you act in opposition. Part of the current government's problem was that they were the no-alition rather than the coalition. They said no to everything. They didn't develop a plan. They got the keys to the car and they didn't know how to drive it. So I'm determined that we act in opposition in a way that prepares us to be a long-term government.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking our questions.
Thank you.